Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master, Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Welcome to Window on the West, where we explore all the ages of Tolkien's Middle-earth, with your hosts, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
Thanks for joining us on this new episode of Window on the West. This week, we're going to be getting into the shortest chapter of the Silmarillion, of men, because that's the entire chapter. It's just of men. In fact, I think there's a lot to talk about in this chapter, more so than you might think in something this brief. I think you said, Michael, it's 7 paragraphs?
Only 7 paragraphs, yes.
7 paragraphs. Yeah. But it's seven thick, dense, earthy paragraphs to go through.
Hilariously, most of the chapter is not about men.
Yeah.
It's only men adjacent, not about men.
But I think what we'll realize is, though it's men adjacent, man, those men have a lot of names. A lot.
They sure
of
do.
Names. All of them.
I have a favorite, but I'll tell you guys when we get to that part.
All right. So, speaking of before we get to that part, today is our new
All that is gold does not glitter.
And this week, it comes to us thanks to our Discord chat, to Naia in our Discord room, who came up with these to stump us. And we'll see how we do. I have the answers. So I did participate in Discord on these questions, and I won't tell you which my answer was, but you can actually go there and check and see that if I was right or wrong, because I did post it before I posted it.
I just have to say thank you to Naia, because these are great, and she probably fooled me, but it's really good. I loved it.
Well, if you like getting involved like this, you can go to theonering.com/patron and join our patrons, right? Where you get access to our private Discord channel, our private message boards, comments, and the extended podcast, which is 15, 20 minutes longer than the normal one, where we go through the questions that folks, that we all talk about in our chats, and some other questions that'll be fun too, and any deeper dives into Tolkien that we might not do into the shorter podcast. But yeah, go to theonering.com/patron and check that out. So, all that is gold does not glitter. So we'll go on to number 1. The first quote is, "I'm not walking another 10 paces unless there's a place to sleep at the end of it. Something to eat wouldn't be amiss either. You haven't been hiding anything in your pockets, have you?" So once again, I'm not walking another 10 paces unless there's a place to sleep at the end of it. Something to eat wouldn't be amiss either. You haven't been hiding anything in your pockets, have you? All right.
Well, there's sleep, there's eating, and there's pockets. So that does sound kind of promising.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next one. "Upon hearing the sound of feet approaching, the watch instantly gave the alarm, and the sleepers as suddenly started up and bent their bows." Upon hearing the sound of feet approaching, the watch instantly gave the alarm, and the sleepers as suddenly started up and bent their bows. All right, number 3. If I can make sure I don't mess this up badly. All right. "She loved dearly the downlands of her home, and never, as she said, in her life could she sleep at peace far from the sound of sheep." She loved dearly the downlands of her home, and never, as she said, in her life could she sleep at peace far from the sound of sheep.
The deep cut reference to Settlers of Catan.
Oh, man. All right. Okay, number 4, last one. "He bore it as long as he could, but finally he was forced to call a halt. Though it was still early, they made camp and," character's name redacted, "fell quickly into an exhausted sleep." All right, so one more time. "He bore it as long as he could, but finally he was forced to call a halt. Though it was still early, they made camp and fell quickly into an exhausted sleep."
And Charlie Brown's teacher fell quickly into an exhausted sleep.
All right.
So these are good quotes. I know I might have said it before, but thanks to Naia greatly, because these are awesome. So the first one. Well, Dan, I've given my thoughts on these on the Discord channel, and I will recount them. I do not know the answer, but I've given my thoughts, so I'll go through them. But I want you to give your thoughts and guess first, maybe.
Okay. They all kind of sound similar. It's a lot of camping, a lot of rural stuff like sheep, which, by the way, is like the worst resource in Settlers of Catan. You can't get anything with sheep.
Nobody will trade you when all you have is sheep.
Yeah, there's camping, there's walking, there's lots of bows and stuff. Yeah. I guess if I had to pick one, because I'm not well read enough, I'm not rounded enough in reading. Yeah, lots of marching and halting. And if I had to pick one, I'd only pick the first one just because it kind of hit the trifecta. There was pockets, there was eating, and there was sleeping, which I think are all three big themes of Tolkien.
So final answer is number one.
That's my final answer. I'm locking it in right now.
That's Tolkien. Okay, so my thoughts are that I'm probably going to be just as wrong as Dan, but it won't be about this quote, because this is the one quote I did know of the four of them. I know that this first quote is not Tolkien because it is, in fact, Robert Jordan, and the character that says it is Matt Cawthon, one of the main characters from Robert Jordan.
How do you? There's like 14 million words in all of Robert Jordan's books. You've read them all, and how do you remember one phrase from his stories?
I'm a sick man, I guess. I don't know.
This one stood out to you as Matt Cawthon? Is it
so he's
quote?
If I remember correctly, he's actually saying it to one of the Aes Sedai, and it's one of those moments where Matt is just showing what Matt is lovely for, which is that he doesn't give a crap about these women that run the world that he's in, and he's deliberately sort of throwing things back in their face, and so it was pretty funny. And so I know, but you're right, Dan. This does have the Tolkien trifecta, so the picking of this quote is perfect for this kind of thing. So I know it's not that one. This one I know I've read before, and it feels to me, because of the way, unlike modern writing, which dwells in the details and tells you in detail by detail what's happening in an action scene. This one is 19th century literature construction action scene, which is swiftly moving and telling you all like an exciting scene, almost all in one sentence. And so, and it's a real, from a literary perspective, it's I think this is Tolkien. So that's my guess, but I'm really torn because the third one,
which is she loved dearly the downlands of her home, and never as she said in her life could she sleep at peace far from the sound of sheep.
This threw me because the first half of it sounds very much like Tolkien. She loved dearly the downlands of her home. So we have the love of home. Loving dearly is the phrase Tolkien uses. Dearly the downlands is alliteration. Tolkien loves that kind of alliteration.
Yeah, it's very
all that glitters is not gold. So it's the kind of thing he loves. And then the second half's about freaking sheep, which I think I should have remembered, and I don't. So it's like it's Tolkien in the first half and not in the second. So I'm reluctantly going to let go of this one. The last one I did not recognize at all, but it has all the detailed happenings, character by character, basically, of what's going on. It's much more modern writing or more modern narrative. Tolkien does do this sometimes, but it's only in certain places. It's only in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and this is definitely not from those two. And a few places in Farmer Giles of Ham and Going in the Green Knight and things, but none of that. So I'm just missing this one. It's not Tolkien. I'm going to go with number 2.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go through them in the same order. What's what? You were right about. Oh, wait. You were right. Okay. So upon hearing the sound of feet approaching, the watch instantly gave the alarm. And the sleepers had suddenly started up and bent their bows. That was Ivanhoe. That was number 2. Is what you had. So yeah, sorry about that.
Bummer.
Have you read Ivanhoe? I've never read Ivanhoe.
I've definitely read Ivanhoe. It's a classic action story. It's like the Robinson Crusoe of the medieval world.
Would you recommend it?
Absolutely.
If you like Tolkien?
And I am right. I was right, sadly, even though I'm wrong. So I'm wrong on the question, but it is Sir Walter Scott. It is early 19th century. Yeah, so that makes sense.
And your degree was in what again?
Medieval history.
Okay. just so we know.
Hey, look, 19th century is not medieval, man.
Well, yeah, but man, you didn't like anyway. Okay. I'm just trying to find an out for myself because I never would have known any of this. All right. Okay, so next one, you're right. I'm not walking another 10 paces unless there's a place to sleep at the end of it. That's the Eye of the World, Robert Jordan. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the best book, I think, in the series still, at least for the 6 that I've read. I thought it was the best. Yeah. First 3 were pretty good.
The last 2 are decent, all right, because they weren't written by Jordan.
Yes, yeah. So it comes down to the last 2. The next one is She loved dearly the downlands of her home, and never, as she said in her life, could she sleep at peace far from the sound of sheep. That is from the story of Aldarion and Arendis from Unfinished Tales.
Ugh. Which I've read, and I forgot the sheep
which
part.
is
Great.
Yeah, she loves the sheep. What's just funny, the only reason that I remembered this, and you can check on the Discord channel, I explained why, is because when I was on vacation, we rented a place in the Smokies, kind of on a like a hillside, a mountainside, and I was sitting out on the patio actually decided to reread Unfinished Tales because it had been a little time. So I reread this here, and I was literally sitting in there looking at downlands of like farms. So it stuck with me, and the whole sheep thing it struck me as weird too, because when does he talk about sheep or animals even that much, unless it's like foxes talking or Bill the Pony? So like just a random like the sound of sheep, that threw me off too. But because that stuck in my head of where I was when I read it, and it was so recent, that's the only. I don't have any good sir.
Wow.
There's no academic reason that I would have known this.
Well, thank goodness, because
I've read it enough.
If there were two academic responses, we'd have put our listeners to sleep.
Totally
so
wrong. Yeah. All right, cool. So there you have it. That is all that is gold does not glitter.
What about the last one?
Oh, the last one. You're right. One more. He bored as long as he could, but finally he was forced to call a halt.
I've never read her. Yeah, I was curious about who it was.
The Harp of Emac Thistle. Dysel? Imac? By Patricia Reed, W-R-E-D-E, which I haven't read either.
I have not read her. I've heard of her, but I haven't read her.
Yeah.
You know what I'm figuring out about this game is if you read more things, you do better at this game. And I'm a very distinct disadvantage here.
Well, I see. I don't know, Dan, because we both lost this game, and I had all these highfalutin reasons, and it didn't do me any good. I still guessed the wrong one. So
maybe next time we'll just do pictures.
stick figures,
which works great on a podcast.
Which stick figure is most like Tolkien's work?
All right. Oh man. All right. So let's get into chapter 12 of the Quenta Silmarillion. Man, when you say Silmarillion fast, it comes out Silmarillion. Anyway, it's hard to say. Chapter 12 of Men of the Quenta Silmarillion. Shortest chapter in the Silmarillion. And as usual, we will jump into
Dan's Big Thought.
So Dan, what nuggets of wisdom are you going to bestow on us as we move forward into Of Men?
Well, thanks for that intro, Jonathan. So my big thought, this is the chapter where you learn that all the elves get sick when they're too far away from the light of the trees too long. So this is how Rings of Power.
No, goodness.
No. Okay.
This is not Dan's big lie.
This is right. Dan's like far diminishing thought that brings us down into the. Okay.
Well, okay.
Well
so on the flip side of that joke, that horrible joke that didn't land, this is the chapter where you can read this and realize that is all completely made up, because we learn about of men, and we also, by contrast, learn about elves and that they don't get sick by being apart from the light. And then you learn a lot about men in a very short amount of time. It seems like, because Tolkien is all about revealing the identity of things through what their names are. And so in this chapter, you have very quickly, he goes through all these names for men that they're given by the elves. And so you have, just real quick running through it, he calls them the Atani. If you can correct my pronunciation too, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but the Atani, the second people, Hildor, the followers, the Aponanor, maybe
Sounds good to me.
The Afterborn, the Engwar, which is the sickly, and the Firamar, the mortals. And he also gives a whole string of other names: the usurpers, the strangers, the inscrutable, the self-cursed, the night-fearers, the heavy-handed, the children of the sun. And so I just think it's so interesting that Tolkien could have like a long narrative that tells you like, oh, this is how we know men are like this because we see them acting in these situations. But no, he just gives us like a little paragraph with a bunch of names, and it's like, this is how you know what men are like, in contrast to the elves, who are not like this. I just thought that was very interesting that he chose to do that. Just it seemed he does this in Lord of the Rings too, where he tells you things about things. He tells you what you need to know by what their name is. And I think that's very interesting.
Right. And to build on that, Dan, I really like that as the big thought, because as a philologist, I think what he's doing is he's telling us, like, who has these names for the men? It's the elves. So he's telling us about the elves in their relation to men by just giving us a list of names of words that they use to describe men. And we learn a lot. We could, if you didn't know anything else about the elves, you could actually infer quite a bit about them from just this one sentence about how they name men in relation to themselves. And so philologists are all about words and how they change and how they reflect the people that use them. And so it's an interesting, my favorite is the inscrutable.
I know, right? Like, huh?
So here's what I love about that. Like, the elves are super wise and intelligent. So if they are calling men inscrutable, that means they don't understand men's purposes. They're failing. They're looking at men and all of their actions, and they're like, do not get it. Nope.
Yeah, right.
Does not compute. And so it tells us something about the nature of men as viewed by, more perfect, more fair, more wise beings, that we're just like, our ways are inscrutable to them, which is really funny.
I wondered when I read through this here, I wondered, because there are so many different versions of elves, bringing up this image that you drew for us, and I touched up ever so slightly, but this is all Michael's. This is Michael's version of
my
how do we
apologies.
figure out all the different names of the elves. And so it makes you wonder, because he talks later in this chapter about how the men, they met the dark elves, right? Some of them got attached to the dark elves who never went west at all, like not even into Beleriand and those areas. Like, it sounds like they were over there where the men were, and some of them were guided from children forth. And so it makes you wonder, like, which ones of these dark elves were the ones that came up with these names? So, the strangers, perhaps.
Right. Yep. And what's interesting is the heavy-handed, the heavy-footed too, probably. But they, it was also fascinating. So just to jump around a bit, because there's different things that pop up in different paragraphs. And for those people that have never, that weren't here for our first podcast, dark elves, do not please wash from your brain all thoughts of Dungeons and Dragons dark elves with night black skin and white hair and, Dritz Duorden and all that stuff. These are just elves that never made it to the blessed lands.
They never saw the light of the trees.
They're dark because they never saw the light of two trees. It has nothing to do with skin color in our age obsessed with skin color. And so what I found was fascinating was when it said that these men were actually very much like, and in strength and power, they were actually the equal of the elves in those days.
I noticed that too.
Which is interesting. Not in wisdom or craft or beauty. Those three qualities the elves excelled in. So the mind, the hands, and ability to make things, and then physical beauty. But in strength and other endurance, these older men were actually the elves' equal, which is very interesting, because that's not the case in the time of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and also when he talks about how Ulmo nonetheless took thought for men, he writes, Ulmo nonetheless took thought for them, aiding the counsel and will of Manwë, and his messages came often to them by stream and flood, but they have not skill in such matters, and still less had they in those days before they had mingled with the elves, which is a note to say, okay, they're not, I hate using the word magical, but like that kind of communication of like, what's the stream saying to me? What's the water saying to me? That's what Ulmo would do to the elves. And he would, like, there was a communication there. Well, clearly there's a skill in that. And that harkened back to like, this is what the skill of Feanor was, more than just, I can, forge iron better than anybody else. He was imparting some of his own, like his being's skill into it, and that skill being like, magical. I hate using that word with Lord of the Rings that much, but Tolkien. But yeah,
I agree with you. I think I'm not quite as squeamish about using the word magical, because I just think it implies something that we don't understand, a relationship and connection with the world that we don't understand, so we call it magical. So the elves are just more connected with the world, with Middle Earth, with Arda, than men are. They're bound to it. When they die, they remain in this world. They do not pass on to the next world, to Iluvatar, perhaps, which is the fate of men, people think. And we're told a little bit about that. about a couple theories about what the Valar and the elves might think of what happens to the souls of men. Maybe they go to a special part of the halls of Mandos, but Mandos ain't telling. So or maybe they don't, and they go beyond the circles of the earth. And that second one is more of the one that Tolkien landed on over time, is what happens to the souls of men. So they are just different. They don't have the connection to the land, and that connection brings with it, what we call magic. There's just this deep connection that the elves have with Middle Earth.
So let me ask you a question. One of the things that struck out to me, it's in the third paragraph after the sort of the section break, where Tolkien writes, men have feared the Valar rather than loved them, and have not understood the purposes of their powers. And it made me think, now, did they fear them because they simply haven't met them, like the elves met them, right? The Valar were enamored of the elves. They came and they wanted them, but the elves feared them first too. They thought it was the evil in the forests, right? They didn't know that it was Orome coming with his coming and watching them essentially, right?
So I think the answer to your question is in the fourth paragraph, which is that it's Morgoth. So Morgoth. He has sown as seed in the dark, and so he's sown this. I mean, we found out that he did so with the elves when they were awoke. He sowed lies about the Valar to try to get them to fear, and it worked on some of them, but they were lost.
But if the Valar, as it says in paragraph 1, wouldn't have just sat behind their mountains at peace, and would have gone out and been like, we like you too, men. We're not judging you. We're not going to be these racist Valar and just, giving affirmative action to the elves. We're here to...
This is another addition. This short chapter has 3 more additions to Michael's great list of the sins of the Valar.
I hope you're keeping a spreadsheet.
So I should. So there's 3 sins the Valar have here. The first is, we see from the very first paragraph that they're kind of content with having gone all on the defensive and built up. It says, the Valar sat behind their mountains at peace, and having given light to Middle Earth, they left it for long untended.
You're welcome.
And the lordship of Morgoth was uncontested, save by the valor of the Noldor. So, sorry, and what we're about to see over a number of chapters, how much of a mistake that is, in my opinion.
Agreed.
And so there's sin number 1. Sin number 2 is in Catholic speak is a venial sin. It's a small one. And that's Olmo. He cares about men. But he's like, now I'm going to talk to him through the streams and waters. And the men are like, what? Don't understand. So this is one of the greatest of the Valar. And he makes the mistake and then apparently doesn't correct it to be keen. He's continually sending messages to people without a telegraph. So... that's just
weird. Don't you get it?
Yeah. How about if I say it again? I'm sure that's gonna be great. And then
number 3.
Then when the Valar begin to when Morgoth begins to exert power over the land, they then didn't do anything. They were happy with the sun and moon. It wasn't just they went defensive but in other words, you can say at first maybe they thought, well, the sun and the moon are going to be good enough because look at the and it does tell us that the sun and moon had some effect on Morgoth's desires for expansion. But then when it became clear that wasn't enough over the ages, they still sat and they had to wait. We had to wait until basically the world had come to an end almost, and Eärendil comes to Valinor and makes the final plea, which we'll hear full about. But Elrond gets a mention at the end of this too, which is interesting.
He does. It's like they Tolkien calls back to the things that have gone before, and then he throws out these nuggets again. It's like, oh yeah, Beren, son of Bear here. There's Eärendil and Elring and Elrond, and we don't really know, right? So he goes in and throws out the nuggets again, and leaves it there. I love though his one line in the last paragraph. It made me chuckle a little bit. In after days, when because of the triumph of Morgoth, elves and men became estranged, as he most wished, those of the elven race that lived still in Middle-earth waned and faded, and men usurped the sunlight. And they're like, ha, it's ours. I'm taking the sun, which is, again, because stupid Valar didn't get involved, left the sunlight to tell the men. So I guess that was their gift to men. Instead of taking them to Valinor, they get the sunlight. But it's funny. It's like men took it. It's like, no, it's ours. We're the ones that are coming out of the caves. You guys won't be here. We're just going to be fruitful and multiply on the earth and take over. Yeah, it struck me as a little funny, the word usurped there.
I almost wonder if the criticism of the Valar for not doing more, if that kind of overlaps with the problem of evil just in general. Like a lot of people would say that with God, right? Why doesn't God stop
That's right. That's
child cancer? Why doesn't God stop gunmen from blowing up buildings or shooting up a classroom or whatever? And I almost wonder if I don't know. I guess I'm taking the side of the Valar. Maybe they know more about the song. Yeah, maybe they know more about the song than they let on, and that maybe that's part of it. That they have some higher wisdom that they're not making us privy to, or do you think, like, when Tolkien's writing this, that he's kind of revealing all their mistakes? I don't know.
I think I think it's super interesting. I think, Dan, that there is a bit of Greek mythology in here in Tolkien's treatment of his own mythos, where most of Greek mythology is telling us how screwed up the gods are. Just telling us all these tales of how the gods are fighting with each other. Now that's not all. Tolkien doesn't do it to that extent, but he is. I think there is an aspect in which he is opening the Valar up to criticism in different points. But in defense of what you just said, and as I think I mentioned last episode when we did Of the Sun and the Moon and the Hiding of Valinor, the very first sentence I pointed out, I am on the side of Feanor here, which is the wrong side to be on. But it says, to reread that, it says, it is told that after the flight of Melkor, the Valar sat long unmoved upon their thrones in the Ring of Doom. But they were not idle, as Feanor declared in the folly of his heart. So this is me, like, declaring the Valar to be idle and not doing the right thing. When in fact, I mean, you're right. I guess one could make the case that what the Valar are doing, first, they do something really significant and substantial. They raise the sun and moon, right? And that seriously curtails Morgoth's attempts to take over Middle-earth, and very seriously. And the next thing they do is they defend their realm by raising up the mountains and creating all these defenses. And the third thing they do is nothing. They give men and elves their freedom. In other words, they do not. They know, as we'll find out in the War of Wrath, they know that if they are to take a hand, all choice is going to leave everyone. Everyone's going to. It's going to really destroy Middle-earth if they go to war with Morgoth, or destroy large parts of it, which in fact it does. Spoiler alert. When push comes to shove, and they eventually have to take a hand. So maybe this like freedom that they're giving, this space, these nearly 600 years, as it turns out, of the first age, maybe there is wisdom in that, and I just should shut my trap.
Maybe, but I would say that the difference is, like, one, it's not an allegory, guys. So we're not going to read into, like, so here's the thing is I like, there is no redemption plan for men or elves that Iluvatar has, like, right? That happened after original sin, essentially. So I think that's perhaps the biggest difference that I would say between the two. So can we judge them differently? Of course you can say the Valar aren't, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just me being a little bit more judgmental because that's my temperament. But
so and I need to clarify, because I agree with you that we shouldn't be reading this allegorically. But Tolkien is very clear about the nature of when you try to force people who have free will to do things. That's an evil act, whether you have good intentions or not. And so the fact that the Valar give everyone space, they give the Noldor space to play out the fruits of their sin, if you want to call it that, and they let men exist, and they don't take a big hand in that, in anything having to do with men. Maybe they've learned from their mistakes in a way. Maybe they're trying to learn from their own mistakes. So could be.
Just like we all should. That's why the second kid always turns out better than the first.
Wait.
Or the ninth in your case, Michael.
Yeah. So I guess the only thing that I have lodged in the back of my brain from previous chapters of the Silmarillion is that they are all the Valar are privy to the song of the Ainur. They know measure 1, measure 2, measure 3. And even we've read about Mandos, how Mandos seems to know everything before it happens. Pretty much, he has like an almost exhaustive foreknowledge.
Except
so I don't know. I guess they got that going for them.
Except what's under the purview of Iluvatar, it says exactly.
Right.
But I like where you're going with the song there, Dan. And I have a sentence from this short chapter about that, which is the end of paragraph 6, near the end of the chapter. The fate of men after death, maybe, is not in the hands of the Valar, nor was all foretold in the music of the Ainur. So let's pretend you're a Valar right now. And in this story, you know what you don't know. You know, it's the wisdom of Socrates, right? You have the wisdom to know that you don't know everything that's foretold in the music of that not everything that's about to happen is in the music, even though you know the music. And some of you know the music really well, like Mondos and Amanwe, but there's not you. But you don't. You know what you don't know, and you know that when it comes to men, there's this kind of a gray area or question mark going on in the mind of Iluvatar. So maybe their tactic is, well, let's just keep our hands off and see what happens.
Yeah. That certainly seems the tack that they're taking. If I had to pick a side, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not as angry as you though, Michael, over this whole situation.
I mean, that's just true in general. Most people aren't as angry as me as about most things. So
yeah, it does seem like they have the power to stop evil. They have the power to bring an end to Morgoth if they wanted to.
Yes.
But they let a lot of stuff happen over hundreds of years, where they just go, well, oh well. So they do open themselves up to that criticism.
Yeah, and you got to think that they knew something about what was going on, but they just sort of waited until a man kind of shows up to make the case.
To make the case for both races.
Yep. Yep. Half man anyway.
All right. Wow, that was a lot. Any final thoughts on this chapter?
I'm actually looking forward to hearing again about what happened to Fëanor, because we left him behind so long ago. I'm like, he burned the ships, and then so that's next chapter. So nope.
And we go from like the shortest chapter to practically the longest chapter.
Yeah, next chapter is going to be quite long. Do we want to split up next chapter?
We may split it up. I'm having a hard time figuring out exactly where. It may be at the point where it stops with when 20 years of the sun had passed, which is a few 5-6 pages. It depends on the copy of the book that you're looking at. But I think that might be a good place to stop. Do half of chapter 13 and then the next half after that. 13A and 13B, because we'll be here for an hour and a half talking about that chapter, I think, if we're going to go into it. So next week, chapter 13 of The Return of the Noldor, part A, let's say up through that first part, when 20 years of the sun had passed. It's not quite half, but there's no... We don't want to split it in the middle of a sentence. So
okay, that sounds good. And then we're going to have lots of references to the Atlas of Middle Earth, which we've referenced in the past. There's some cool maps that all have to do with next chapter, basically. So.
Yeah, we'll bring that out too. We'll move on to that. But before we move on to that next week, we have our favorite part of this end of the episode. I don't know if it's our favorite. It's just a good part because like last week. Okay, so you guys recommended The Hobbit, the end of the John Howe's illustrated version of The Hobbit. I think it was Alan Lee. Sorry, not John Howe. I have it over there now because I didn't have it yet. I realized. I don't know. I never got it. It's one of those. They publish so many now that I missed it. But I found it on eBay for like $20, and I was like, I got to get this. So
nice.
I went and bought it. So you guys are causing me issues. Cheap enough where I didn't quite have to get the wife's approval, but still. So this week, I think, Michael, it's on you. Michael, what would you say?
If you like Tolkien.
Right. So we mentioned a couple things about this beforehand. So this is a little bit out of left field in the sense of that this isn't something that you would think would come first to mind if you like Tolkien. But what I'm going to say is, if you like, and I don't have a cool prop to show. I mean, I do, but I have to dig out some books. Oh, okay. You're going to do the prop. All right, good. So while Jonathan goes and gets the prop, here we go. Prop time.
Yeah, I got something. This is the closest I got.
There you go.
All right.
Chesterton's Gateway. So if you like Tolkien, you will in fact almost definitely enjoy Chesterton. Now that's a weird thing to say, maybe, because Chesterton, while he did write fiction, he is not known mostly for his fiction. He's known mostly for his books. He was a journalist for decades, and so you can be known for that. But his books, such as Orthodoxy, and his engagement with the world of theology and civics, and he lived at the beginning of the 20th century, so right on 100 years ago. He was at the heights of his power. Chesterton was in fact an influence on Tolkien, and what I'm going to focus on just for a brief second is to say that one of the reasons that I think that people that enjoy Tolkien will also enjoy Chesterton, and I'm not just saying that off the top of my head, but most people that I've known that have read both do, is because Chesterton had that character both in his fictional writings and in his nonfiction writings that you see throughout, epitomized by Tolkien's themes, and that is this character of whimsy and fancy. Chesterton's world of imagination is fantastic, and he knows what makes a good fairy story, and he knows, and you see it in his fictional writings, which are not fantasy. They're not medieval level sort of what we can now think of as fantasy, but they have this element of imagination and whimsy which really, really connects. And his love of language, Chesterton's love of language, is also very evident. He's a master of prose. He says things in just these. He paints these mental pictures as you read him, which are so powerful. And while they aren't the same kind of mental pictures that Tolkien creates in Lord of the Rings, nevertheless, there's a kinship there. At least I find it to be so. So, if you have a fancy, you should pick up that book that Jonathan held up, Chesterton's Gateway. This is a good one because it takes 14, I believe, essays from different places and excerpts from Chesterton, so you can get your fingers wet reading it.
And there are nice little footnotes that explain the odd references that you might not get, being none of us have actually had a classical training in the kinds of things that he would have assumed people had back then, at least a lot of his readers. So yeah, great book by Ethan Nicole, Chesterton's Gateway. I'll link it down below. So
yeah, that's a great place to start, his essays, and those are 14 really good ones, because I think a lot of people go, oh, I need to read Chesterton, and they run out and buy Orthodoxy.
Oh my gosh. And
it's like it's hard to get through, especially if you don't know the references and you don't understand the types of, basically he's referencing things in his day 100 years ago, and you don't know the names, you don't know the places. It's really rough. So the essays are good, especially if you have a footnotes like Ethan's footnotes there.
I agree.
Yeah, highly recommended. All right, thanks, Michael. Yeah, pick that up. I still haven't read through all 14 of them, but we were all, and it goes back, we were all a part of a Chesterton reading group. That's kind of how we met. I mean, all through the Babylon Bee, but we were in that same reading group that met at a cigar shop, and that was great. So yeah, and hey, if you really want to dive deep into it, start your own Chestertonians group and dive into the essays, because sometimes you need more than one person to dive into the depths of what he's talking about with the knowledge that other people might have around you.
Reading Chesterton is a communal activity, and maybe Tolkien has that. I mean, here we are sitting and talking together about Tolkien, so they're not too far apart that way.
Well, that leads us into a question that Naia had too in our Discord chat that we're going to answer, which is what authors of a more modern date other than Beowulf did Tolkien read and reference, other than G.K. Chesterton? So we're going to answer that not now. No. So we're going to
all you freeloaders who are just listening to us and for free and have no commitment, you can go away now.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're going to no, I'm just
we'll move on into our extended patron podcast that you can get if you're a patron at theonering.com/patron. It's $4 a month, free the first month, so you can try it out. And if you really dislike what we're talking about, I guess cancel. But if you like it, hey, stick around and join us in Discord. Join us in our video chats that we have. It's a lot of fun. And and we're going to move right into that, guys. So thanks for joining us, and you patrons. We'll see you on the other side.
Bye-bye.
All right.